Ethan never expected his hometown to feel so empty. When he stepped off the bus, duffel bag slung over his shoulder, the familiar street stretched out before him like an old photograph, washed out and faded. The little things had changed. The gas station where he used to hang out was boarded up. The diner replaced by some trendy cafe, and the people, they looked at him differently. His mother's house was smaller than he remembered, but the scent of home, freshly baked bread and pine cleaner, still lingered in the air. His mother greeted him with teary eyes and trembling hands, but there was hesitation too, as if she was hugging a stranger. "You're home now," she said softly, as though trying to convince both of them. Ethan nodded, but something gnawed at the back of his mind. Home. It didn't take long for the unease to set in. His old friends had moved on. The few that stayed behind had families, careers, lives. He'd show up at bars, smile at familiar faces, but the conversations always fizzled into awkward pauses and forced smiles. They'd ask about his time overseas, but not really want to know. His childhood home, though unchanged, felt unfamiliar. The creak of the wooden floors no longer comforting. The walls seemed thinner, the shadows longer. His mother hovered around him like a ghost, unsure what to say or do. Even his bedroom, still frozen in time with high school trophies and band posters, felt like a museum exhibit of a life that no longer belonged to him. And at night, the dreams came. Distant gunfire, the cries of his brothers in arms, the cold emptiness of foreign lands. But most unsettling were the dreams of the woods he used to play in as a child, calling him. One evening, after another failed attempt at conversation with his mother, Ethan took a walk. He wandered through town, hands stuffed in his pockets, past familiar landmarks that no longer held meaning. He found himself drawn toward the edge of town, where the woods loomed tall and dark. Something in him ached at the sight of them. He stepped into the tree line, and it was as if the air shifted. The wind whispered through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something familiar. The woods smelled of damp earth and pine needles, just like they did when he was a kid. The old path was still there, winding its way toward the frozen lake he and his friends used to dare each other to swim in during summer. As he walked deeper, he swore he heard something, his own laughter. But it wasn't his voice now. It was his voice from years ago, echoing through the trees. Ethan froze. A rustle in the distance. A low whisper. "Come home." His heart hammered in his chest. He spun around, scanning the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just trees and the heavy silence pressing in on him. He hurried back home, but the feeling followed him. That night, he woke up drenched in sweat, certain he had heard someone calling his name from outside his window. Days passed, and the pull of the woods grew stronger. He tried to ignore it. He got a job at the local hardware store, but the hours dragged, and his mind wandered. The customers would talk to him, but their words felt distant, muffled, like he was underwater. The nights were worse. No matter how much he drank, how tightly he shut his eyes, he could still hear the whispers. "Come home, Ethan." He found himself sitting by the woods more and more, staring into the darkness, searching for something he couldn't name. And then, one night, he made his decision. His mother was asleep when he slipped out the front door. The streets were silent, the town asleep in its blissful ignorance. Ethan walked with purpose, his boots crunching against the snow as he entered the woods. The whispers welcomed him, curling around his ears like an old friend's embrace. He walked deeper than ever before, past fallen logs and half-frozen streams, until he reached the lake. The ice stretched out before him, a glistening silver sheet under the moonlight. His reflection stared back at him. Only it wasn't quite right. It smiled when he didn't. "Come home," it whispered, its voice curling like smoke in his ears. Ethan stepped forward onto the ice. The next morning, his mother called the police. He hadn't come home. The search party combed the woods, finding nothing but an eerie silence that seemed to press against their skin. At the edge of the frozen lake, they found his boots, neatly placed side by side, but no footprints led onto the ice, no cracks in the frozen surface. Ethan was gone. Weeks passed, then months. The town whispered about the soldier who had come home and vanished. Some said he had walked onto the ice and fallen through, his body trapped beneath the surface. Others, the older ones, spoke in hushed tones about the woods and the way they sometimes called people back to them. His mother never left the house, sitting by the window every night, staring at the edge of the trees. And sometimes, when the wind was right, she swore she could hear his voice, calling, "Come home, Mom." But she never answered.